really got to try on that left-hand side. What happened?
Oh, but I've gone up and over and bloody head over biscuit. It wasn't enough stability there for myself, but no, I was busting for a bit of meat this game. It didn't seem to work out.
Hello, cheers, and welcome once again to the Scrum of the Earth podcast, the weekly show for news, reviews, great interviews, and so much more, all about the world of rugby. My name is David Lawrence. I'm an American rugby fan who follows the game wherever I can find it all over the globe. If you'd like to get in touch, I'm on Blue Sky @ofscrum, and you can always email thescrumoftheearth@gmail.com. Well, this is, of course, part 3 of what I'm calling Quad Pod, where we drop 4 different podcasts over it's now become a 4-day window. Part 1 was on Sunday when I welcomed back the voice of the top 14, Robbie Knock. I highly recommend giving that a watch or a listen. In part 2, we covered the opening round of the new Super Rugby Pacific season, which got underway on Friday. This pod is your more usual weekly pod, where we go through the results from the domestic action all across the northern hemispheres. So, starting, as always, with our current updates, unfortunately, and some of you already know this, I have lost my job. It took me almost 5 years to get back into a job that felt like the perfect fit, but they decided it wasn't after all, so that's that. It was a union job, but the contract stipulates a 21-month probationary period, and during that time, you can be let go for any reason under the sun, or no reason at all for that matter, and sadly for me and my family, that's exactly what happened. My friend John Anderson, he reminded me of a very rugby slogan that I'm using to sort of keep positive at this stage, which is simply, we get up and we go again. So that's what I'm doing. Hey, look on the bright side. My terrible news turned into great news for y'all, because you suddenly get 4 pods in a row right in the same week, for which I assume you are extremely grateful. Yeah? Yeah? Wait. Meh? Maybe so grateful, in fact, that you, I don't know, might leave a review or subscribe to the YouTube channel or maybe tell a friend about it. Anyway, in all seriousness, I really do appreciate all of your support. At times like this, it's indescribably valuable. So thanks to all of you. I really do appreciate all of you.
It's too good. People have to know.
Well, yes, Isaac, it is good news this week, although it was really last week, as Warren Gatland is no longer the head coach of the Wales men. I'm not here to dance on his grave or anything like that, especially since he and I were let go on the same day. Coincidence? And there's a reason the guy has a commemorative gate with his name on it, but at this point, I mean, come on. It honestly felt like he was trying to get himself canned at this point, and after 14 tests lost in a row, I mean, was time, or maybe a bit past time, right? So fortunately, I've got some extra time now. So if they throw the right package my way, I could be tempted to take the helm. I don't own any of the types of blazers that I would expect to see around the offices of the WRU, but I could just, sort of bring like a Belichick-style element with like Wales hoodies with the sleeves cut off. Like, they definitely need to shake things up, right? So I'm just saying. Anyway, getting right into our reviews, we're going to start by heading over to England to cover the Premiership, and you know what? That's done. For some reason, while the URC and the top 14 are right back at it, the Prem goes on hold during the Six Nations window right through late March. And, given some of the weird action we saw in the URC, in particular this weekend, it makes me wonder if they're the ones who have it right. Wow, imagine using those words in the same sentence. Premiership, doing it right. Side note here, I was chatting with friends of the pod, Hugh and Harley, just before the start of the Six Nations, and I was doing a fair bit of complaining. So to be clear, I don't dislike the Six Nations. I actually love the Six Nations. The stakes, the history, the drama, there's always at least 1 or 2 absolute classics mixed in there. My problem is, kind of spoils the other rugby around it. Like, those 5 weekends are weekends that we can't watch the URC or the top 14 or the Prem, which itself means we get 3 games rather than like 20. And besides that, the week or 2 ahead of the start of the tournament water down those competitions, and then the sort of in-between weeks, like, because the best players, with the exception of Warren Gatland's picking, are all off to camp. So anyway, by the end, we get a couple of milquetoasty rounds of domestic competitions, followed by an incredibly small number of games on offer, followed by yet more pale and sickly versions of domestic competitions, and it's a bit of a drag, especially if 1 or 2 of the Six Nations games is a dud, which is always pretty likely. So anyway, I guess you could say I love the Six Nations for the 10 months it's not happening, but slightly resent it while it actually is happening, if that makes any kind of sense whatsoever. Rant over. Anyway, thankfully, there was actual rugby happening in England. Thank all the gods for the PWR, which is really getting down to crunch time. Friday featured a huge matchup, perhaps the most significant game of the season, at least for Bears fans, as Bristol made the trip to London to take on powerhouse Harlequins to keep their playoff season, their postseason hopes alive. This may have been the game of the week for me. It just had everything. It looked like Ellie Kildun might single-handedly steal it back for her favored home side, but a back-breaking try for the Bears late gave them a 2-score advantage with simply not enough time left to go. It was a valiant effort by Quins, who lost their second straight and might have submarined their hopes for a home field advantage, but Bristol, they took care of business. They have now done all they can. Their fate now in the hands of others. After a game like this, you have to want them to make it, right? Like, surely this can't be the last time we see this iteration of this remarkable team, yeah? Anyway, final score at the Stoop, 10-19, a pure thriller and an instant classic for the PWR Archives. The PW Archives, maybe? Anyway, on Saturday, Ealing Trailfinders were back at home for the struggling Leicester Tigers, a match that turned into a full-scale shootout. Leicester looked as good as they have all season, getting their third win of the year, 43-45, despite not scoring a point for almost the final half hour. The home team, they nabbed 2 tries in just the final 10 minutes and even had a couple of minutes left to potentially steal it, but their clock struck midnight. It was elation for the visitors. I think it's Francesa. I always want to say Francesca, but I think it's Francesa McGee. She had a heck of a game, getting a hat trick in the win and looking untackleable at times. After that, the frightening Saracens, they won with a rush album 21-12, defeating up and down Exeter, who I still can't figure out, not even one bit. Incredibly, Saris did all their damage in just a 25-minute period, getting and converting all 3 of their tries between minutes 12 and 37. The larger implications, of course, are that Saracens secured a top 4 finish, while the Chiefs' loss put a stamp on the Bears' ticket to that postseason. Finally, it was Sale Sharks' turn to take a beating at the hands of the reigning champs Gloucester Hartbury, and they managed to do just that, losing a game they were never really in, 24-41. Mia Venner got a hat trick for the winners in what the comms described as a, quote, clinical, unquote, victory, nailing down the top seed in the PWR for the year and underscoring their position as the team to beat. 6 or 7 weeks ago, it looked like it might be time for a new champion to step in, but as we head towards that final weekend, it's really hard to see past the back-to-back winners. As I hinted, this weekend set in stone are 4 semifinalists, which will be Gloucester Hartbury in the top spot, Bristol Bears in the 4th spot. So all that remains to be seen is whether Saracens or Harlequins will nail down the 2nd seed and secure a fixture or possibly even 2 at home. Saracens, they'll be at home to face Sale, which looks like a sure win for them on paper, at least, while Quins have to travel to Gloucester to take on the league leaders. If this was the NFL, I'd fully expect Gloucester to be like, hey, you know what? Let's rest all of our starters, but I don't think that's how they're going to approach it. It's worth looking back on how big Friday's match turned out to be in terms of how the end of the season is now playing out. By losing at home to Bristol, Harlequins opened the door for last year's runners-up to sneak back into the playoffs, danger, and at the same time, with Gloucester's subsequent win, lost them a chance at the top seed. What's more, now they have to face the current league number 2 to try to earn a home semifinal, which means in one fell swoop, they may have gone from first place to being on the road for the entire postseason. That Bears game was truly one that got away, and they might have the better part of a year to lament it. Just as a sort of closing thought, I'd also like to point out my Loughborough Lightning. It felt to me like they were much better this season, but when I look at the table, I see they need to beat Ealing to secure the exact same position for both teams, actually, as the 2023 to 2024 seasons. So it's actually the Trailfinders who are in position to come away with an improved performance. I'm just always fascinated with how sort of like the eye test compares to the reality, and it always feels like rugby sort of leads the world in that disparity. Anyway, next up, let's switch over to the URC, which, as I said, had a bit of a weird round, given the off-brand selections for most teams. Ospreys versus Leinster had the makings of a Saltine versus Sandblaster kind of matchup, but given the children that Leinster decided to send, Ospreys managed to hang in it for a good spell before the inevitable reality did take hold. Ospreys, They looked okay for a little while. With 3 minutes left, they had a tiny prayer, down just 3 points and in possession. But the Ospreys number 21, I think that was him, Finton Gunn, I think it is. For me, he looked slow and unprepared, like he was busy complaining about a non-call as Leinster just yoinked another turnover. And I don't know. It must be really tough to be a fan of this team. Though, to their credit, the fans on hand clearly thought it was the ref that was the main source of their downfall. 19-22 was the final tally. Justin Tipperick left standing, hands on hips, once again wondering why the F he decided to go through this all again. So, Edinburgh versus Zebre featured more, for lack of a better term, top players for the home team at least. The Mish was starting, Buffelli was back, Ali Price looked like he had something to prove, which I admit would be good to see. Zebre were unaffected by the international window. After about a half hour, with a yellow against the hosts and a 7-point lead for Zebre, it finally occurred to me how devastating this game could be for Edinburgh. It was 17-22 with 10 minutes remaining. The visitors, now down to 14 players, they looked desperate to give it away, but no. With 10 seconds on the clock, Edinburgh stuck deep in their own territory. Zebre got a beautiful turnover to effectively seal it, and 17-22, they won their second straight on the road, crushing the budding hopes of the Edinburgh faithful. Just a massive blow, but an incredible day for a team already half off into that good night. Side note, Edinburgh versus Zebre, Crusaders versus Hurricanes, and Harlequins Bristol. 3 unbelievably good matches, and that was just on Friday. This is why you need to be watching multiple competitions, people. Anyway, Lions versus Stormers got your Saturday morning started. I admit it was a little too early for me. I missed it entirely. It had been 6 games since the Stormers, against the Stormers, since the Lions had last won, but they were determined to finally buck that trend, leading 24-6 at halftime. While they let off a bit in the second half, they still held on for a much-needed win, 30-23. Stormers managed a losing bonus point after the clock had already gone red, but it's just hard to know what to make of them at this stage. After that, we were off to Pretoria for Bulls versus Sharks, and when I was filling out my little Super Brew, predictors for this week, this is the one I found hardest to call. The Sharks fielded a pretty loaded side, but they're still without Eben Etzebeth, who I thought was supposed to be back like a few weeks ago. Anyone know what's up with him? Anyway, it was a close, if somewhat unexciting contest. The teams locked at 7 after about a half hour, but the big news was more injury woes for the Sharks. Trevor Nyakanye, he had to be helped off with what looked like a bad leg injury. I'm hearing now it might be his Achilles. Yikes. And the sight of him returning to the sidelines on crutches and still in visible pain did not bode well for their season's fortunes. It was 7-10 at the break, and the visitors held the same margin entering the final quarter hour. By the end, however, was kind of a convincing win for the Sharks. They pulled away late, 19-29. It seems that mystique, that luster of invulnerability at Loftus has been thoroughly dispelled by now. They just look ordinary at the moment. Worthy of note, Sia Masuku, another phenomenal game, and he seems to be generating a lot of Springbok vibes at the moment. Love that guy. Anyway, Connacht. Oh boy, they were at home for Cardiff, looking to avoid losing 3 in a row at home and 5 overall. Just an increasingly dispiriting season for my Galway guys. Connacht, they started quickly, but we've seen that script before, and I was worried it was going to be another 20-minute performance at the Half a Sports Ground. But by the break, they still held a 14-0 lead. Cardiff didn't look like they had many plans to turn it on until they changed their minds. Josh Ioane continued to have his struggles off the boot, but my Connacht were still up 19-12 as we entered that final 15 minutes. The visitors tied it up soon after, and I was starting to get that familiar feeling as a Connacht supporter. Was this surely about to happen again? I mean, seriously about to happen again? Surely might be the better word. Anyway, fortunately, so not inevitable, a driving maul with only a few minutes left got my guys back on top. They would just manage to hold on. They even gave Cardiff one final shot at the death, but it was, in the end, a much, much needed win for Connacht, 24-19. Munster versus Scarlets staggered to a 7-3 halftime score before the home team kind of found their groove a bit. Scarlets eventually scored a try of their own, but just the one, thank you kindly, and it was a thorough, if uninteresting, win for Munster, 29-8. That score was padded by, a bit by Munster getting an insult-to-injury score with the clock well read, and despite being down to 14 players at the moment, gotta say, Expected a bit more from the Scarlets. It looks like they're in a bit of a funk at the moment. We also had Benetton hosting Ulster, and if you haven't seen the Matt Gallagher, the try he scored from a broken play, it's definitely worth a look. Some lovely kicking skills combined with serious pace, and it was a score that drew the teams level after a quarter hour or so. It was still a close one, 17-19, as we approached the intermission, and Ulster looked desperate to give this one away, coughing up 2 yellow cards in just the third quarter of play. Despite that, Benetton, they held only a 1-point advantage, neither side willing to grab the game by the collar. A third yellow, though, opened up a window that even Benetton couldn't ignore, and Isakor's try at the end drew a bold line under their eventual 34-19 victory. By the way, if you're anywhere in Europe, if you glance up towards Belfast right now, you might just be able to make out the shiny tip of the handle of the fork that is sticking squarely out of the back of Ulster. They are done. Finally, on Sunday, it looked like we'd end up with end the round with a whimper rather than a bang, as the Cover Your Eyes Dragons were taking on what I assumed would be a Glasgow under-20s team. As it turned out, though, it was actually the Dragons under-20 versus the Glasgow over-60s, with Duncan Weir again donning the captain's mantle. And just to make my downbeat assessments seem reasonable by comparison, the comms started this game by saying, "The festering sores of losses in the early months have become rather open wounds at this stage." And, I mean, maybe we should have all taken this week off, okay? Anyway, Dragons, they actually raced out to a 10-0 lead, but they saw it erased in a blink, finding themselves behind at the break 20-24. Gotta say, Alex Cuthbert was on comms, so I had to fast forward most of the way through the second half. The guy, he's obviously an expert, but I just can't handle listening to him. I can't even put my finger on why. Like, if it was all written, I would happily read it, but I just can't listen to him. Either way, I think someone forgot to tell the Dragons that there actually was a second half, because their scoreline didn't move the rest of the way, while Glasgow ran away with a 20-45 win while keeping most of their powder dry. Just quickly, because I noticed Connacht and Ulster both just have 4 wins this season, but look at that list. Teams currently on 4 wins after round 11: Edinburgh, Stormers, Connacht, Ospreys, Ulster, and Zebre. Crazily, the Lions are actually positioned in 12th, despite having 5 wins, and they still have 2 makeup games coming, so they could be moving up or down quite a bit. Either way, it's a top-heavy competition at this stage, and I just feel sure that's setting us up for more late-season drama. Of course, the top 14 was also back in full effect. If you're interested in that, I can point you straight towards the lovely chat I had with Robbie Knock on Sunday. We pretty well covered the results before that final match of the round on Sunday. And at this stage, you know what? I'm actually still saving that one. It was Toulouse versus Clermont. I picked Toulouse to win. Like, that's a stretch. But Robbie actually had Clermont winning, Toulouse getting a bonus point, which would put, I think it's 3, maybe even 4 teams exactly tied for that top 4 on points. Pretty incredible stuff. But anyway, give that a listen. Robbie is just a genius, and it's always fantastic to hear him. Anyway, enough beating around the bush. You all knew what was coming. The new season of Major League Rugby kicked off this weekend, and we got off to an unbelievable start. Just the best possible opening weekend we could have had. So much fun. Side note, the Rugby Network, I understand, is still carrying the MLR overseas, but this year, ESPN Plus has picked up all the games here in the U.S. Friends, if you already have Disney Plus, it's quite possible you bundled in ESPN Plus at the same time, so take a look. You might have a ton more rugby available all of a sudden. Anyway, this weekend, most importantly, of course, was my Free Jacks starting their campaign for a 3rd straight title with a visit out to Los Angeles to take on the Bellends. For new listeners or new fans of the MLR, the LA franchise unveiled their logo while failing to notice that they'd made it look unmistakably like the head of a certain organ. So while, there are other nicknames for them floating around, I tend to stick with the Bellends. So just so you know, it's not me pointing at the actual players or coaches or implying anything about them. It's just that their dim-wit franchise decided to go with a logo that makes the rest of the competition literally laugh out loud. Anyway, it was a closer game than I would have liked, but a win is a win, and that's what we came away with. 17-24. We managed 3 tries to their 2, getting scores from Wayne Vanderbank, Paula Balacana, and one of my new favorite players, Jed Melvin. The result spoiled the debut of Christian Leafano, a hell of a player who joins us from Super Rugby, but he did manage to lead all scorers with 12 points. Not going to lie, could be a tough start to the season for my Free Jacks, as we have to stay on the road for the next 2 weeks, as is our tradition. We're heading over to Chicago, who looked great, as we'll see in just a sec, followed by Seattle, who made it to the final last season and are a perennial contender. We finally open up at home on March 15th, where we'll host NOLA, who most people agree had the most aggressive and positive offseason in the entire MLR. As I said, a win is a win, and I will take it. So aforementioned NOLA, they were at home for the experimental side, the stupidly named Anthem, and they looked as good as I had feared, running away with it 35-14 and never looking in any danger. Elsewhere, Chicago, they went down to Houston and shocked the Thundercats 22-25. On Sunday, San Diego rebuffed my buddy Phil and my assessments that they had grown too old, getting a statement win against their oldest rivals and the oldest rivalry in Major League Rugby, in fact, the Seawolves of Seattle, 40-26, back in the cozier confines of Torero Stadium. But it honestly pains me to admit it, the thriller of the weekend, it was DC. Absolutely robbing Miami, who had looked in control all day long. The Sharks could have put the game to bed, clinging to a small margin, but this is rugby and people make weird decisions. Keeping it in play ended up costing them a win, courtesy of some fine crossfield kicking for DC. I still don't believe in them, and they're still the closest thing we have to a real rival, and an annoying one at that, but DC Old Gory, my hat's off to you this week. An amazing win to start the year. 29-31 in an exciting one. Well, by the music, you'll know it's time for this week's Diamond in the Ruck Award. And this week, the award goes to Alessandro Issacore. Mr. Issacore, your player of the match performance for Benetton helped earn a statement win at a time in the season when most fans were willing to give up. You provided the spark that has people buzzing right now. Your late try helped seal a win that you had fought for all day long. And for me, your team wouldn't have gotten there without you, Alessandro Issacore. Congratulations to you, for you are this week's Diamond in the Ruck. Well done, sir. So, that brings us, of course, to our updates and previews. If you're a rugby fan, you've got a ton of options. Obviously, the Men's Six Nations is back for round 3, featuring a Calcutta Cup clash at Allianz Stadium, London. Italy will be hosting France, and potentially, of course, my debut as head coach for Wales as they take on Ireland. Ooh. You know what? I might wait a couple more weeks for that. Anyway, we've also got the final round of the regular season for the PWR. Already outlined that pretty well earlier. We've got round 2 for Super Rugby Pacific and Major League Rugby. And guess what? There's a whole leg of the Sevens up in Vancouver. So you're welcome, everyone. Well, my friends, that does it for another week. As I said, I'm kind of on the struggle bus right now. I'm kind of using the pod to kind of keep myself buoyed, or as Hugh would say, buoyed. So if you do reach out and I'm a little slow to reply, that's why. Please don't take it personally. I'm just on the struggle bus, as I said. Anyway, if you're actually hiring and have an open spot for a relentlessly sarcastic ne'er-do-well, well, I think you've already pretty well looked at my resume. So to all of you across the globe, cheers, talk to you soon, and be well.
It gives me great pleasure to be here today.
Oh, it does, neat.
You want to tempt the wrath of the whatever from high atop the thing?
I wish I could get up at 11:30 every morning after being out all night God knows where.